Hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope you're all doing well today and excited for this wonderful holiday baking session with Diabetes Hope Foundation. My name is Stephanie, and I'm a volunteer liaison for DHF. My whole family has been very actively involved with the foundation for over a decade now, and it's very near and dear to all of us. And what a better time to give back than during the holiday season to support some very exciting initiatives like this wonderful baking session, which I'm actually very super excited about myself. So again, I just want to welcome everyone to this session. I hope you guys have a great time. And I want to also introduce the real host of this evening, the wonderful Jamie Everett. So Jamie received her Diabetes Hope Scholarship in 2015. She has since now finished her studies at Carleton University with a Bachelor's of Social Work and is working full-time at a not-for-profit focused on helping families who have been diagnosed with epilepsy. She recently launched a small baking business to bring her passion of creating sweet treats for family and friends to life. And I'm sure she will tell us a lot more about that very shortly. And she also hopes to continue working in the medical social field and one day serve adults living with type 1 diabetes and their families while also growing her small business on the side. Lastly, before I pass it on to Jamie, I just want to let everybody know that today is about fun and excitement. It's very laid back. We very much welcome questions. So at any point, should you have any questions, please feel free to just type in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, take it away, Jamie.
Today we are going to be making peppermint white chocolate or candy cane white chocolate cookies. The perfect simple treat to make for the holiday season that we have coming up. So I figured I would share this recipe with you guys. There are of course so many holiday cookie recipes out there. This is just one of my personal favorites. I've had my taste testers over the last week or so testing them out, making sure they're good for you guys. So I can't wait to hear your feedback, and I hope you're able to make them with your friends and your family and whatnot. So we will get right into it. So bear with me while I shift my screen over to our ingredients for today.
So we'll start with our wet ingredients, and some people may find this interesting that our sugars are actually considered our wet ingredients. Don't ask me why. I think it's mostly because you mix them often with oils and butters and creams and stuff like that. So we've got we'll start in order. We've got our shortening and our unsalted butter. We have half a cup of each. We've got our 1 cup of white sugar here. We've got 1 cup of white sugar. We've got 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. And we'll move over here, and in this bowl, it's kind of hard to see because it's all white, but we've got our flour, our salt, and our baking soda. So we've got 3 cups of all-purpose flour. We've got 1 teaspoon of baking soda and half a teaspoon of salt in this bowl. Then the exciting stuff, the stuff that adds that fun holiday flavor, is we have our 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and we've got 1 teaspoon of peppermint extract or mint extract. Whatever you have on hand is fine. Baking is all about being on your toes, so work with what you've got. And then finally, what makes it extra holiday, if that's even a word, is our white chocolate chips and our crushed candy cane. So that is what we are working with today. So to start off, I know you guys can't see me, but this is my KitchenAid. I want to point out that not everyone is lucky enough to have a KitchenAid, so you can do this by hand if you're feeling strong, or you can use just a hand mixer as well. It's really about working with what you've got. So we are gonna get this going. And the first thing that we're gonna add in is our butter and our shortening. So I use an unsalted butter and just a vegetable shortening. I think Crisco is the brand. So you can find that pretty much in any grocery store. And I will also say, never be afraid to get your hands dirty while you are baking. I can't count the number of times that I've had to wash my hands while making a recipe, so don't be scared to get in there. Next, we've got our 1 cup of white sugar, so I'm gonna dump that in there. Hopefully you guys can see. You can also see my feet, but that's okay. 1 cup of white sugar and 3/4 a cup of brown sugar. It doesn't have to be light. It doesn't have to be dark. Whatever you have on hand is perfectly fine. So we're going to dump that in there. And I'm actually going to mute myself for a minute because my KitchenAid is very loud and we need to beat this until it's light and fluffy and creamy. It's a really important step. That's what makes those cookies nice and thick and chewy. So we need to beat the sugars and our butter and shortening together. So I'm going to do that. So you can beat that anywhere between 1 minute all the way up to 3 minutes. It depends how fluffy you want it, but as long as it's well incorporated, you are in really good shape. So next, what we're gonna do, we're gonna start with our wet ingredients, and then we're gonna have a little conversation to kind of break it up, give you guys a second to absorb what we're talking about today. Next, we are going to add in our vanilla extract and peppermint extract. So I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to make sure that's well incorporated before we go on to the next step.
So can I ask, while you're doing this, Jamie, maybe you can let everybody on here know if they don't happen to have a mixer like the wonderful one that you have there, can they also do this by hand? I imagine it might take a bit longer, but will you get the same consistency with the cookies?
For the most part, like I said, making sure that it's pretty well incorporated. The lighter the color of the butter and the shortening, the better. It might take a little bit of muscle and a little bit of strength to get it there, but you are more than capable of doing it with a whisk and a bowl. If you don't have a KitchenAid or a hand mixer at all, you can absolutely do it by hand. In fact, that's how I started doing all my stuff. So more than possible to do that. So next I'm gonna add in 2 eggs. So I realized that I forgot to get my my eggs out before we started. So that's why I disappeared. But we're gonna add in 2 eggs, one at a time. And the reason we do this is to make sure that each yolk is properly incorporated into the dough. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna see if I can get this in here. So we got 1 egg in there. Unfortunately, I'm not a pro. I can't crack with 1 hand yet, but I hope to be able to do that at some point in the future. So we're gonna get that in there. You'll see the yolk kind of dispersing, getting all nice and mixed in there. That's what's gonna keep our cookie together. Now, if you are allergic to eggs, there are so many egg substitutes that you'd be able to use in this recipe. You can use flaxseed, chia seed. I think you can use aquafaba. There's so many options, but I know there's quite a few people out there with egg allergies. So that is also an option if you wanted to swap those out. All right, so that is nice and incorporated in there. And next we're gonna add our 2nd egg. Got that in there, and then we're gonna mix this, and I think we're gonna have a little discussion break. Okay.
So I think it's really important to talk about some of the myths that often go around when you think of sugar and diabetes. So if you've ever been on the other side of the stigma that surrounds that, you know that it is really challenging to explain to people that you can have the cookie without feeling bad about it. So there's so many myths that come with living with type 1 diabetes. Opening a baking business is always a little rough when people know you have diabetes. You get a lot of questions like, oh, that's funny that you like to bake and you have diabetes. But I think it's, I think we're able to do anything that we want to. I know there's lots of, sugar jokes out there. I'm sure we've all seen them before, but I say do what you love. Baking is a form of art. It's a form of expression to me. So you can do it, and it's all about moderation. I'm sure, again, we've all heard that before, is that there's a time and there's a place and there's the insulin to be able to do it. So I think we're super lucky to have the ability to indulge in these amazing sweet treats all the time, or no, some of the time, whenever we feel like it. They also make a really amazing low snack. I can attest to that. So I think it's important to remember that you know what, you don't have to listen to what other people say. You do what works for you, and just do your thing. If you love to bake, keep baking. That's what I did. I've been baking since I've been about 12. I've been making my own birthday cake since then. So obviously my family and my friends are really instrumental in encouraging me to carry on with that. So I hope that any future bakers or current bakers continue to do what they love if that's what their heart tells them to do.
That's great. And I guess maybe one of the questions I have is I know that two of the ingredients are white sugar and brown sugar, which are fairly common in a lot of baking recipes. But maybe you can give us some ideas of, substitutions that we can use if we don't want to use sugar. I know I personally like to cook with coconut sugar. I find it's a really great addition or substitution for brown sugar, but I'm definitely not a seasoned baker. So maybe you have some additional substitution ingredients that you can tell us about.
Yeah, so pretty much if you are savvy enough and if you are driven enough, you can make any recipe work with all the wonderful sugar substitutes you have out there now. Coconut sugar is not one that I've experimented with yet, but I have experimented with things like Splenda and stevia and brown sugar Splenda, and they're all great because they just cut back on those carbohydrates and make it a little easier for insulin to do its job. But what I will say is sometimes baking is very much about chemistry, and I unfortunately am not a chemist, but what I have noticed when using some sugar substitutes like stevia and Splenda is it makes my baking a little bit more dry. It still tastes amazing. I haven't really been able to notice a difference in the actual flavors of the cakes or the cookies that I'm baking, but just be prepared for it maybe to change the texture a little bit. So I've played around with my grandma's famous chocolate chip cookies using stevia, and they're still amazing. They're still delicious. They just don't look like they normally do. So it's really about trial and error. I've tested out quite a few different things. My favorite substitute is actually the brown sugar Splenda for recipes like this that do call for brown sugar. The consistency is the same. The texture is the same. You probably wouldn't even know the difference between the two. So those are kind of a couple of things I've done, but really experiment. Like, don't be afraid to test things out. That's how I figure things out. I just go with the flow and see what works and see what doesn't. So I think the same goes for sugar substitutes.
Okay, wonderful. And then we actually have a question here. So I'll just read it. So it says, I've been trying to use sugar substitutes for brown and white sugar, like monk fruit. How do we stop it from absorbing the liquid and making the recipe dry?
Yes, that's a problem I have yet to figure out how to solve. So I'm not the best person, but something that you could do, and some things that I've tried before, are finding recipes, whether that be on Pinterest or on Google, that are specifically created to use those sugar-free ingredients. So I'm a baker, but there are millions of other people out there that do that baking as well. So what I would say is see what they're doing, see how they make the softest, chewiest chocolate chip cookie without drying them out, because I've had the same experience. I just cannot duplicate my grandma's chocolate chip cookies using stevia. I just don't think it's gonna be the same for me, but explore, see what's out there, and then see what they do. I know a really common way to increase the moisture in cupcakes and cakes and cookies, all types of baking, I should just say, is using vegetable oil instead of butter. That one's a really good tip. It makes them moist and smooth and really delicious. So maybe experiment with using oil instead of butter.
All right, that sounds great. And maybe we can talk about, some tips and some strategies for managing diabetes, especially during, holiday seasons. Christmas is a big one, Easter, but I think specifically Christmas, we all know there's lots of holiday treats, there's lots of sugar, there's lots of carbohydrates. So do you have any tips in terms of managing your diabetes during the holiday season?
Well, I don't limit myself. I'll start by saying that it is a season of indulgence where we have lots of treats, we have big dinners, we have all that food. So I try not to limit myself, because who wants to if they don't have to? But I guess some tips and tricks were combined there. Some tips that I've kind of generated over the last many, many years back from when I was a kid was making sure that I'm bolusing or giving my injections early, well in advance, so my insulin has the opportunity to start working before I have the cookies or have the slice of cake or whatever it is. That's what seems, that is what seems to work for me. A couple other things that I guess you could take into account are not limiting yourself, just being prepared. Go in with the mindset you're like, I'm going to enjoy myself and I'm not going to stress about it. The cooking that you get at Christmas is very unpredictable in terms of carbohydrates and carb counting. It makes it a little tricky. So I say give yourself a little bit of wiggle room, give yourself some grace if you don't do it perfectly. I know it sucks to be like, oh man, I thought I did the perfect dose, or my blood sugar was perfect when we started. What happened? But just try your best, do what you can, and give yourself a pat on the back regardless, because it's a tough season when all you want to do is taste out all those treats and sweets that are on the table at Christmas time.
Sounds good. I guess maybe one other thing we can talk about before, we get on to mixing some more ingredients and getting these cookies on the go. Maybe we'll talk about how to stop diabetes misinformation from spreading, and, how to be an advocate.
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot day to day living with diabetes. It's a question I get a lot in my work as well, because I work with another population that lives with chronic illness, and it's really about, nipping it in the butt and stopping it in its tracks. So advocacy work is all about, knowing the correct information and how to approach people who are spreading it. So whether that be on social media, when you see, like I mentioned earlier, those jokes about, oh, this is going to give me diabetes or diabetes or whatever it is that you see on social media, it's not being afraid to stand up for what you know is correct. I've had it happen in my personal friend groups and social circles before. And you know what? Most people are pretty receptive to realizing that maybe that wasn't the correct thing to say and educating them. So that's all you can do is say, hey, that's not right. And they'll take it as they want and do with it as they will. So I just say, catch it as you see it. It's hard to hear sometimes. Sometimes you're like, you know what, maybe it's better to just let this fly. I'll get over it. It's not affecting me personally, but that's how stigma is created, by not correcting wrong information. So the more we can do that, the less misinformation will be out there, hopefully.
Sounds like some great tips.
So maybe I'll switch you guys back to my phone so you can see what I'm doing.
All right, so we are nearing the end of these amazing cookies. I'm telling you, they are so simple. They're really similar to a chocolate chip cookie. So our second last step, I should say, is incorporating our dry ingredients. And let me tell you, this can either be a flour explosion or go really smoothly. But one tip I have for all of you is adding it in slowly, because a couple weeks ago, I decided not to do that and I looked like a ghost leaving my kitchen at the end of the night. So I would highly recommend incorporating it in slowly, just to avoid any chaos that may arise from the flour bowl. So I was prepared today, and I pre-measured everything. So keep in mind that that's a really big part of baking, is having everything prepared. It always makes it go more smoothly. So I'm going to turn my mixer on here now. So excuse the noise for a second. So you see how it kind of tosses up a little bit. So you can imagine if I had poured all 3 cups of flour in there, it might be a little bit of a mess. So once you see that it's starting to combine, I switch it off again, and then I add the rest of it. So even just doing it in 2 sections can save you a ginormous mess later down the road. So let's see if I was correct. So it may toss it up a little bit. It's even better if you do this by hand sometimes, because you're able to control the dust that is being tossed up, but that's okay. You do that, you do what you can. So I just turn mine up a little bit more, because the more flour that's in there, the thicker it is, and it's a little bit harder to combine. But you'll start to see the dough forming. So if you've ever seen cookie dough, whether it came from a package or you made it yourself, you know that it starts to form this really smooth, creamy batter, or dough, I should say. This is probably one of my favorite doughs I've ever worked with just because it is so smooth. So it's coming together there. It doesn't have to form into a perfect bowl, like not bowl, ball, like we think of when we think of doughs, like pizza doughs and bread doughs. It can be a little bit crumbly, look kind of like this. It doesn't look like the most appealing thing ever, but we know it's going to taste delicious once we add our mix of candy canes and white chocolate chips in there. So I just bought full candy canes, and what I did is I pulsed them in my mini what's the word looking for, food processor, but you could just as easily throw it in a Ziploc bag and smash it with your hands or your rolling pin or whatever you have on hand. That's just as easy to do. So there are ways to really switch up anything. You don't need all the fancy tech to have good baking. So we're going to put that in there. You can put it all in at the same time. You'll see that I have a little bit more candy cane dust in there, but that's okay. That's going to make it extra pepperminty, and who doesn't love candy canes? Now, one thing I will say is when you're buying candy canes for this recipe, make sure you're getting the peppermint ones. I was almost fooled when I purchased these and getting cherry ones, and I think it was like a fruit punch flavor. So it won't be bad, but it'll definitely influence the taste that you get at the end. So that takes no time at all. You'll see that we have a really nice creamy buttery dough to work with here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch you back to my computer now that you've seen the mixing process, and I'll show you the size ball that we want to work with for creating these cookies.
This recipe created a lot more cookies than I was anticipating, but it makes about 36 medium-sized cookies. So even more if you wanted to make them smaller, even less if you wanted to make them jumbo-sized cookie. It's really about your personal preference. So I'm going to line my baking sheet here with parchment paper. I'm sure we've all done that in a recipe before, so I'll spare you showing that. And we want to so the recipe typically says about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half sized cookie dough balls. But like I said, it's really about the temperature, how long you want to bake them for. So if you want a bigger cookie, you just bake them for a little bit longer and you have a jumbo sized cookie. If you want them a little smaller, you bake them for a little less. So for the size that I'm doing today, like I mentioned, the medium sized cookies, they look about to be this big. So that's it in the palm of my hand there. So it's pretty large, and these take anywhere between 15 and 17 minutes to bake in the oven. Please remember that everyone's oven bakes a little differently, so keep an eye on them. Don't throw them in and walk away, because that's how you end up with some really crispy cookies, which I'm sure would be good, but not quite what we're looking for today. So I'm gonna roll all of these out, and then I'm gonna pop them in the oven. And I think actually while I'm doing this, Stephanie, we could probably either answer some questions or we could have another discussion, if that works.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I guess one of the questions I have before maybe we get into discussion topics is, again, I'm definitely not a seasoned baker, but I know sometimes we like to let the cookies rest after they come out of the oven. Do you have any suggestions on how long they should rest, or if they should take them right off the pan? And yeah, just any tips or any feedback you can give on that.
Yeah, for sure. So you have to think about it. So when you take cookies out of the oven, the tray is still going to be hot for a little bit afterwards. So you have to think about that as the cookies are still baking as long as they are on that hot tray. So the suggestion for these cookies is to leave them on the tray for about 10 minutes after they're done baking. So you have a chance to put the next batch in and then transfer them to a cookie tray or a cooling rack with the grids in it. Can really use anything, just as long as there's air being able to get underneath the cookie, because you want it to cook. Sorry, my words are not coming smoothly today. We want them to be able to cool evenly all the way throughout. So
Right.
Really important to make sure that the air is able to get to them underneath to cool them down even faster than if they were sitting on the tray.
Okay.
Not a big deal if you don't have a cooling rack. Just take them off the tray onto like a cool plate or a cutting board or something like that. Anything like that's fine.
Okay, and we have a couple of questions here. So firstly, how do we get crunchier, crispy cookies? And how do you achieve a soft inside and a crunchy outside?
Well, it really depends on the recipe, but a big part of the kind of moist cookie that we're making today is the brown sugar. So the really soft, like I said, is considered a wet ingredient. So if you wanted a crispier cookie, what you could do is you could cook it, bake them with more white sugar than brown sugar. They will go a little flatter, which will ultimately make them crispier. So that's an option. That's one of the only options I can actually think of. You could also bake them for a little longer. So typically with a regular cookie, you let the bottom get brown, but you could make it a little bit longer. Maybe you leave it in the oven an extra 3 or 4 minutes, supervised, of course. Again, you don't want burnt cookies, but even just leaving them in the oven for a little bit of extra time could achieve that. Now, in terms of chewy on the inside, crispy on the outside, again, a lot to do with how you're baking them. So a big part of this recipe, and I think I forgot to mention it, was the butter was not melted in this recipe. You could actually melt it and you would have crispier cookies. Actually, I just thought of that now. But you could, butter keeps it like a stiff dough. A little bit thicker, it's a little bit heavier, so it allows it to stay risen. So make sure that your butter is not melted. I know I have the chronic problem of leaving my butter in the fridge and forgetting to take it out. So you can toss it in the microwave. It's like an art getting it to the perfect softness in the microwave, but depending on the amount of butter you have, usually 15 to 30 seconds, it does it perfectly. It keeps it thick and not melted. So that's an option. But those are kind of my tips, is just making sure that you're following the recipe as it's written, but what goes into it makes all the difference, and how.
All right, sounds good. So another question, when you remove warm cookies, do you place them on a paper towel, or I heard brown paper bag was effective for crispy cookies? Any ideas?
That is a new one. I don't think I've heard that before. I can see that maybe the paper or the paper towel might absorb some of the oils from it as it cools, but I'm not really sure. That's something that I would have to look into personally. Maybe I learned something today. I'm a chewy cookie girl myself, so I'm not often looking for the crispiness, but yeah, I guess it probably has something to do with the way it cools and allows it to cook even longer, because like I said, maybe the air doesn't get under it to cool it off as fast. So
okay, sounds good.
So I've got them all plated, well, not plated, but I've got them on my tray here. I have about 8 of them. I have them staggered. You want to make sure that they are pretty evenly spaced out so they don't bake into each other. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a monster cookie, which maybe some of you want. That's fine. But make sure they're evenly spaced. I would say these balls are about 2 tablespoons in size if you need a frame of reference. And I'm going to bake them in the oven at 350 degrees for anywhere between 15 and 17 minutes. Like I said, it's very important to keep checking in on them to make sure that they are doing okay, because every oven's a little different. So I'm going to pop these in the oven.
Alrighty. So let's talk about being empowered in the kitchen. So, ways to build confidence while you're cooking and baking in general. So how do you do that?
Practice. As plain and simple, it's practicing and it's playing with it and it's having fun. So like I said, I've been doing this since I was a kid. A long time, 13, 14 years now. So it does take time. It takes practice to get good at anything, whether you're playing a sport, whether you are, learning Taekwondo, whatever it is, you need to practice to get good at it. And the same goes for baking. Now, building confidence, I feel like sometimes it can be a little overwhelming learning how to bake or learning how to cook, whatever it is you're doing in the kitchen. But the truth is, trial and error is your best friend. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself, because if you're anything like myself, if you put pressure on yourself, it's not going to be fun anymore. But definitely just play around with it. Don't be scared of trying new things. I know as some of you may be transitioning into university and cooking for yourself, that's the best time ever to practice things, because you're trying it just on yourself or your friends, and you have nothing to lose. So get in the kitchen, get experimenting. Like I said, try recipes from Google, Pinterest, all these amazing resources we have. Maybe the book that Diabetes Hope Foundation has out, so many different options, but starting with the recipe and kind of playing around with it. Maybe you add a little extra sugar here, maybe you add some more chocolate chips there. That's what builds confidence, is doing a good job and, you know, just having fun with it. That's the best part about baking and cooking. I throw on some music a lot of the time, or I listen to a podcast, and I just make it a whole experience. So make it an enjoyable time for yourself. That way you want to do it again.
All right, that sounds great. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about sugar and carb replacements in baking. I know we touched on this a bit earlier, but you know, just given what you've done, do you feel like it's worth it, or what do you think?
I think it depends on the person. For me, I feel like I've gotten pretty good at figuring out, you know, how to, like I said, give myself insulin for it, how I need to do that, how many carbs are in a cookie. The more you practice that, the better you get at it. I think it's worth it for some people and not for others. Personally, I don't try that hard with it anymore. I was there about a year ago, kind of experimenting with like Swerve and stevia and all those other replacements. But I want baking to be something that I really enjoy, and I want it to be a treat for me. So sometimes it's nice to take the diabetes cap off a little bit and have fun with it, and just, you know, take care of yourself, but also, you know, live your life at the same time. So I opt not to use a lot of sugar replacements in my cooking and baking, but that's just my personal preference. You guys, like I said, there's so many resources online now and recipes. Play around with it.
All right, that sounds great. And I guess again, we have kind of touched on this, but maybe we'll talk a little bit about the balancing act, living your life without letting the negative stereotypes get in the way. How do you do that?
Yeah, we definitely talked a little bit about this. Personally, I like to focus on me and what's working for myself. I think we get in the habit of, you know, trying to please other people, make other people happy, do this, do that. I do what works for me. So for example, I recently went off the pump and a lot of people questioned me about it. It was what was best for me. Ignore the judgy eyes, ignore the shock when you hear that you're not using diabetes technology, all those different types of things. Stereotypes can come in many different forms. Maybe some of us don't even realize that they exist, because they've unfortunately become a regular occurrence in day-to-day life. But do what's best for you and focus on you first, and find the people that aren't going to stereotype you and judge you for what you're doing in your day-to-day life. So that would be kind of my balancing act, is keeping good people around me and knowing what I need.
All right, that sounds great. And maybe, I guess, since we have a couple more minutes, we can talk about maybe some fun stuff. Maybe you can give us some ideas of what your favorite treats are. I know the cookies that we're doing today are probably one of your favorites, but what other things do you enjoy baking, and what are your favorites during the holiday season?
Yeah, so you probably heard me mention cakes a lot today, but I love making cakes and cupcakes. I feel like I can be really, really expressive when I'm making them. I also love watching other people enjoy them and hearing how much they loved it. So cake is one of my favorites, but also, you know, those seasonal treats like pumpkin pie and apple pie and Nanaimo bars, all those things that we only have at a certain time of the year for the most part. I really take advantage of those when they're around, especially when I don't have to bake them. I love it when my family does it for me, but those are easily some of my favorites. And but cupcakes and cakes are absolutely my number ones in terms of, if I'm in the kitchen, I'm either doing cookies or I'm doing cakes, one or the other for the most part.
Right. And with the business that you've now started, your small business, what's your specialty, or do you have one, or, you know, what kind of things do you do, and what do you find that people really like?
Yeah, so like I said, I've primarily stuck to one niche for now, as I'm doing cakes and cupcakes, 3-tier cakes, those really pretty ones that you probably see on, those baking shows, not the extravagant ones. I can't even imagine going there, but my specialty is definitely in cakes and cupcakes for now. I've done baby showers and gender reveals and weddings and quite a few things like that. And each one has kind of tested me in a new way because everyone wants something different for their special occasion, whether it's a birthday or a wedding. So I've had a lot of fun working with florals and just experimenting with different tips and stuff, but I have really loved it so far, and I'm hoping to expand my skill even more.
All right, so we've got a question here, and I think we touched upon this earlier, but maybe we'll go through it again. So can we sub sugar with stevia or natural fruit sugars, and how does this affect the overall texture in baked goods?
So I think mixing these ingredients is a really good idea. That way you can still kind of preserve the moist and tenderness of cookies that a lot of people enjoy, but cutting at least the sugar in half. We did touch on this a little bit earlier, but same thing goes is, find a recipe that someone else has potentially developed that works with the sugar replacements. Like there's tons out there, but you can absolutely mix. I've done this before, especially in cooking, using a little bit of stevia, a little bit of sugar, just to cut it back a little bit. Like I said, it makes it a lot easier to control your blood sugars when you're not having that sugar spike at the end of the day. So it's all about experiment. Baking is one giant science experiment, and no one even realizes it until you start playing in the kitchen. And it can be a lot of fun. There might be some disasters, but I definitely say go for it, because if you're mixing sugar and stevia together, like I said, you're going to preserve the moistness of the cookies that a lot of people love.
All right, that sounds great. So I'm gonna send it back to you now. I know you probably have some time on your cookies there, but maybe with the miraculous time, whatever we want to call this here, maybe you have something there ready to show us. I'm not sure.
I do. I think it's like TV magic or whatever you want to call it. But I'm gonna switch my cameras and I'm gonna show you what the finished product should look like when all is said and done.
This is the finished product. This is just plated up a few on a cookie sheet, but you can really play around with it. I think styling and plating cookies is some of the fun parts about it. You can use a bunch of different plates. You can use different trays or whatnot. So you can see I have my little Christmas setup over here. You can see I have a whole cake tray filled with them. Like I said, this recipe originally makes about 36 or 32 to 36 cookies. So I had plenty to play around with on my trays here. You can see I have another one over here, just a little holiday themed. I have so many of these beautiful cake trays. I love to see them full of goodies. Over here I have some here, but like I said, they aren't always going to be the prettiest. Cookies are very unpredictable in how they're going to cook sometimes, but I think it's the taste that matters most. So this is the finished product. I'll bring it back over here. I chose the prettiest ones for you guys, but they are so soft and moist.
Like you just break them open and see the inside, like they're super soft. You can see the peppermint and the candy cane and the white chocolates in there. Every cookie is going to be a little different. Make sure your chocolate chips are well mixed throughout. That way you don't end up with one cookie that has like 40 chocolate chips and one that only has one. That's one of my tips. Just making sure that it's really combined super, super well. But yeah, that's kind of the recipe. Like I said, my cookies still have about 5 or 6 minutes left in the oven. So like I said, TV magic is amazing, pre-made stuff, but now I just need to find someone to feed all these cookies to, because it's not going to be me. I don't think, at least not all of them.
Fortunately, we don't have magic to put those through the screens here. Otherwise, we would all have some nice treats, I'm sure. So we actually have another question that just rolled in, so maybe we'll go ahead and answer that. So do you have any tricks for carb counting when eating baked goods when you don't know the ingredients?
When you don't know the ingredients. So what I've been doing for years, and I think it's just kind of happenstance. So I guesstimate a lot. I don't know if that word has been used for any of you before, but I usually have a number in my head for how much a cookie is worth. And Something that you can do is look at the pre-made cookies and see how many carbs are in that and the size versus, you know, something like I've made here. It's a little bit smaller, but we don't know the carb count in these. For those who do choose to bake their own cookies at home, there are a lot of amazing websites where you can plug in ingredients and it will give you an overall carb count and fiber count that you can figure out the carb count for. So my biggest recommendation, I think, would just be kind of surf around, have a look at comparisons, and see what other things are worth, who have already done the math for you. So like I said, the box cookies, the farmer's market cookies that you can buy at the grocery store, see what their carbs are like and kind of go from there. But like I said, there's no perfect magic solution for getting the absolute correct stuff when you're not sure what you're eating, but trying your best. And like I said, giving yourself a pat on the back, because as long as you're trying, you're doing a good job.
Jamie, I'll leave it to you at this point. I know you've got a few more minutes there with the cookies there in the oven, but is there anything you want to add? Maybe you can talk a bit about your own business that you've got going on, and also if there's any other things that you want to share with us, whether it's you know, holiday season related or you know, cooking related, please feel free.
I love my job being a social worker, but I also really enjoy baking and being in the kitchen too. So I figured if I could, you know, bring these sweets and treats to other people in my community, why wouldn't I do it? Because I have the skill and I have the resources to be able to do it. So I figured it was worth a shot.
And I imagine you're probably pretty busy this time of year.
It's been kind of slow, but I'm actually very thankful for that. It's that end of year kind of slow down where things are starting to get a little tired. Oh, there we go.
All righty.
But I imagine in the next couple of weeks, those last minute baking orders will come in, and I'll be overwhelmed with orders, but that's a good thing. I love doing it.
All righty. Well, we'll definitely let you take those out of the oven. So we'll give you a moment to do that. So we will let her do that. And before we, you know, wrap up for the day, maybe we'll get Jamie. I know we can't taste them, unfortunately, but they look wonderful. So maybe we'll get you to actually do a taste test and just let us know how good they really are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've done some taste testing, but you will never see me turn away the opportunity to have cookies. So. I would say these are basically like your basic chocolate chip cookie, but with like a winter twist in it. So if you're looking for what to expect, think of like your basic chocolate chip cookie and add some peppermint into it. They are so good. I'm sure everyone will love them. I know the people in my house have, my friends have before. So I promise you will not be disappointed if you enjoy candy canes. I'm not sure everyone does.
Awesome. And maybe you just want to give us a quick little show of what the cookies look like. I know they're resting right now, but just to give us an idea of what those look like coming out of the oven.
They have this beautiful crackle in them. They are the perfect, they're really soft right now, so I would recommend just leaving them to cool and harden a little bit. But these are what they look like coming out of the oven. You can break off these melted pieces around them to make them look prettier if you want. But like I said, baking isn't always perfect. It's really about the taste at the end of the day. So don't be worried if what you see on TV or on your computer screen doesn't match what comes out of the oven. It is totally fine.
All right, that looks really good. So maybe we'll just, Jamie, maybe we'll just put up the recipe again really quickly just so everyone can see that. And in the meanwhile, as we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone today for joining us, and I really hope you guys had as much fun as we did today. Should you wish to view this session after, we will be posting this on our YouTube page. We're also going to post the recipe on our website and our Facebook page, so you can access it at any time. Also, I think it's a great opportunity, and I know Jamie had mentioned that we have this new Transition in the Kitchen workbook. Recipe book, and it's got lots of recipes inside. It's compiled by Diabetes Hope Foundation, and it features quick, easy, delicious, healthy, diabetes-friendly recipes. So you can actually download it free on our website, or for a $50 donation, we'll actually send you a complimentary book bundle, which includes this Transition in the Kitchen recipe book, as well as the Nothing Can Stop Me book, which is illustrated and published by 2 of our own alumni, as well as a tax receipt. So if you're interested in purchasing, or if you're interested in giving a donation and getting a complimentary book bundle, please feel free to email us at info@diabeteshopefoundation.com, and we'll get those sent out for you. I think we covered a lot of topics today, and I really hope this was informative for everyone. It was a great opportunity, and it was super exciting, super laid back. And I will just say, Jamie, I love your sweater. It's really cute. I really like your sweater. Super festive. So it's been a great time, and I don't see any more questions. Jamie, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I think that I was just so glad to do this for you guys. So thank you so much for having me. And
yes, and thank you for your time. I really hope everybody is appreciative as I am. This has been a really good session this evening. So hopefully everybody will jump on and make those wonderful cookies, and we'll, like I said, we'll post the recipes so everybody will have that handy for their own time. So again, info@diabeteshopefoundation.com. You can email us with any questions you might have, or if you wanted to get this wonderful book bundle that we have, please email us. And thank you all again for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Thanks, guys. Bye.